Under the soft glow of a silvery moon, where the whispers of the forest dance on the breeze and the world seems to hold its breath, a young man named Aelfric sets out on a journey unlike any he's known before. This is a tale of magic and wonder, of a deep connection that crosses the boundaries of time and worlds. In the heart of the forest, where the trees have stood for centuries and secrets are kept in the rustling leaves, Aelfric meets a mysterious being, one whose beauty and mystery awaken something deep within him. But the forest is more than just a place. It is a living, breathing entity, and Aelfric's bond with its magic will lead him to discoveries that will change his life forever. Tonight, as we drift into dreams, let us follow Aelfric and Lyrielle, a creature of the ancient Fae, on a journey of shared moments, quiet wonder, and the timeless dance between what is fleeting and what is eternal. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale, silvery light across the land. Aelfric, a young man with dark, tousled hair and eyes full of quiet curiosity, stepped lightly through the underbrush, his boots pressing softly into the moist earth. He had walked this path countless times before, following the faint trails that only those with a heart attuned to nature could perceive. Tonight, however, there was a difference in the air, a crispness, a crackling energy that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. He had always been drawn to the forest, ever since he was a child. To the other villagers, it was a place of superstition, filled with whispers of magic and creatures that should not be trusted. They avoided it, preferring the comfort of their hearths and their everyday lives. But Aelfric was not like them. From the moment he first entered the woods, he felt a strange sense of belonging, as though the trees themselves had been waiting for him to arrive. The deeper he ventured into the forest that night, the more the world seemed to shift. The usual sounds of night, crickets chirping, owls hooting, were absent. Instead, there was an eerie stillness, as if the forest was holding its breath. Only the rustling of the leaves above him seemed to offer any hint of movement, as though the trees themselves were watching, waiting. And then he saw her. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Standing in the center of a small clearing was a figure, bathed in the light of the full moon. She was ethereal, almost glowing, with delicate wings shimmering like the finest glass. Her hair cascaded down her back in silken waves, glistening with a soft luminescence that seemed to blend with the moonlight. Her eyes, wide and bright, like two pools of silver, locked onto his with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Aelfric froze. He had heard the stories, of course, of the Fae, the mystical, otherworldly beings who roamed the deep parts of the forest. But he had never believed them to be more than fanciful tales spun by old women to keep children from wandering too far. And yet, here she was, standing before him as if summoned by his very thoughts. Her wings fluttered gently, a soft sound like the rustle of leaves in a breeze, and she took a step toward him. Aelfric's heart raced, a combination of awe and trepidation settling over him. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice unsteady. The Fae tilted her head, her eyes reflecting the moon's light as she studied him. "I am Lyrielle," she said, her voice musical, like the wind whispering through the branches of ancient trees. "And you, young one, are Aelfric, are you not?" Aelfric's breath caught in his chest. "You know my name?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyrielle smiled, a gentle curve of her lips that somehow seemed both knowing and kind. "The forest knows all who walk beneath its canopy," she said softly. "And you, Aelfric, have walked here many times, have you not?" He nodded, still too stunned to speak as he gazed at her in wonder. "But you're a Fae, aren't you? I've heard the tales." "Yes," Lyrielle replied. serene. I am one of the Fae, a being of the old world, bound to the earth and sky, to the moon and the stars. But do not fear, Aelfric. I mean you no harm. Her eyes sparkled, though there was an undertone of sadness there, a weariness that did not belong to someone of her apparent youth. Aelfric took a cautious step forward, his gaze locked on her delicate wings, which shimmered like the soft light of a lantern in a darkened room. I've always wondered if such creatures really existed, he said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and wonder. But I never thought I'd meet one. You were meant to, Lyrielle said softly, her gaze drifting toward the sky where the moon hung like a silent sentinel. The forest has been waiting for you, Aelfric. The words sent a shiver through his spine. Why? She met his gaze once more, her expression unreadable. Because, like all things in this world, there is a time for meeting and a time for parting. And you and I, Aelfric, are destined to meet at the crossroads of time. Aelfric furrowed his brow, confusion clouding his thoughts. Crossroads of time? He echoed, unsure of what she meant. What do you mean? Lyrielle smiled again, but this time it was tinged with melancholy. Perhaps it is best to show you, rather than explain. Without another word, she turned, her wings fluttering as she glided toward the center of the clearing. The moonlight seemed to bend around her, illuminating the surrounding trees in soft hues of blue and silver. Aelfric watched in silence, entranced by her otherworldly presence, unsure of what to make of it all. Come, she called over her shoulder, her voice like a gentle breeze. I will show you a place where time is not so easily measured, where the heartbeat of the forest can be heard and understood. Aelfric hesitated, the weight of his world pulling at him. But something deep within him, something he could not explain, urged him forward. He followed Lyrielle, stepping carefully through the clearing, his heart racing as the distance between them closed. This was no ordinary night, no ordinary meeting. It felt as though the very fabric of his life had been rewritten in this moment. And as he walked beside her, the soft light of the moon guiding them, Aelfric couldn't help but feel that this encounter was only the beginning of something beautiful, and yet something he knew deep down would not last forever. As the days slipped by, turning into weeks, Aelfric found himself returning to the forest with a quiet urgency. He could no longer explain it to himself, why the call of the forest seemed stronger with each passing day, why his thoughts constantly lingered on Lyrielle. Each encounter with her had left him with a sense of peace, but also an undeniable longing. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was mesmerizing, but the way she seemed to understand him, the way her presence felt like a balm to his soul. The seasons began to change as they always did, yet for Aelfric, time seemed to warp in Lyrielle's company. When they were together, the minutes stretched into hours, and hours into eternity. She would speak of ancient magic and faraway lands, of stars that had burned out before his ancestors had even been born. She spoke of the Fae and their ageless existence, of how the world shifted in ways humans could never comprehend. But there was an underlying sorrow in her voice, a quiet sadness that echoed like a distant storm. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and painted the sky in hues of amber and purple, Aelfric found her standing by the edge of a crystalline lake deep within the forest. The water's surface was perfectly still, mirroring the starry sky above and the silver light of the moon that bathed Lyrielle's figure in an almost otherworldly glow. Her wings shimmered softly, like the faintest reflection of the moonlight in a still pool. Aelfric approached her quietly, almost reverently, as though he feared disturbing the fragile peace of the moment. When she heard his footsteps, Lyrielle turned to face him, and their eyes met. For a long moment neither spoke, simply taking in the beauty of the evening. The air smelled of earth and damp moss, of fresh leaves and the soft hum of distant life. The world felt alive in a way that Aelfric had never quite understood before. Finally, Lyrielle spoke, her voice as gentle as the breeze that stirred the trees around them. "It is beautiful, is it not? The world, I mean. How it never ceases to change, yet somehow remains the same." Aelfric nodded, his heart stirred by the depth of her words. He had always known that the world was full of beauty, but in her presence it seemed amplified, as though every leaf, every stone, every whisper of wind had a story to tell. "Yes," he said softly, "it's more beautiful than I ever imagined." Lyrielle smiled, though there was a distant look in her eyes, a look that spoke of a lifetime of memories. "That's the way it is with the Fae," she said, her voice tinged with an almost melancholic lilt. "We see beauty in everything, yet we are never truly part of it. We wander, we watch, but we cannot stay." Aelfric frowned, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean? You're here, aren't you?" She looked at him, her gaze intense and searching. "I am here," she said slowly, "but I am not of this world. I do not belong to it, Aelfric. My kind exists outside the flow of time, outside the limits of mortality. I wander the world, but I cannot remain in it for long." Aelfric felt a pang in his chest at the sadness in her voice. He had always known that the Fae were different, but he had never truly understood the weight of that difference. He stepped closer, as though his presence could offer some comfort. "Then why are you here with me?" he asked quietly. Lyrielle's gaze softened, and she reached out, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead in a gesture that felt both intimate and infinitely tender. "Because," she whispered, "for a brief moment in time, our paths have crossed, and for that moment, I can be here with you." The words hung in the air between them, a fragile truth that Aelfric couldn't quite grasp. But in his heart, he knew that whatever this connection was, this bond between them, it was more than just a fleeting moment. It was something deeper, something that neither time nor the differences between their worlds could fully explain. Days passed, and Aelfric returned to the forest again and again. He began to understand Lyrielle in ways he never thought possible. She was not just a being of beauty and magic. She was a creature of ancient wisdom, someone who had lived through countless seasons, witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, and felt the passage of time more keenly than anyone. Her laughter, when it came, was like the tinkling of bells in the distance, full of life and joy. But even then, there was a note of sorrow, of something lost. They spent long hours together, walking in silence, sharing the quiet of the forest. Aelfric learned more about the Fae world with each conversation, and in turn, he shared his own stories, the small joys of village life, the comfort of hearth and home, the simple pleasures of tending the fields and watching the seasons change. It was a strange contrast, their worlds, one of eternal beauty and timeless magic, the other of fleeting moments and impermanence. But in their shared silence, Aelfric began to feel a connection that transcended the boundaries of their lives. One evening, as they sat beneath an ancient oak tree, the golden glow of the setting sun filtering through the leaves above them, Aelfric finally gathered the courage to speak his heart. "Lyrielle," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what this is. I don't know what I feel for you, but I can't stop thinking about you." Lyrielle looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing, simply staring at him with those piercing silver eyes that seemed to see into his very soul. Then at last, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You feel what is impossible to explain," she said quietly. "But that does not make it any less real." Aelfric's heart raced as the weight of her words settled upon him. He wanted to tell her how much he cared for her, how he wished things could be different, how he wished they could stay in this moment forever. But the words felt inadequate, as if speaking them would somehow lessen the depth of his feelings. Lyrielle stood, her wings rustling softly in the breeze as she turned to face the darkening sky. "Aelfric," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "you are a fleeting moment in time, and I am the eternity you will never know." He stood as well, stepping toward her. "I don't care about eternity," he said, his voice fierce with the urgency of his emotions. "All I care about is now." She turned back to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and longing. "And that is the beauty of it," she said softly. "The beauty of now. But nothing lasts forever, Aelfric, not even this." The silence between them deepened, the weight of her words settling in. Yet despite the sadness that lingered in the air, Aelfric felt an overwhelming sense of peace. He had found something beautiful, something rare, even if it was fleeting. And he knew that whatever came next, whatever the future held, it was this moment, this connection, that would stay with him forever. The days blurred together, and with each passing one, Aelfric found himself more and more drawn to Lyrielle. He had never known such longing, such a deep pull toward another soul. Their moments together had become his sanctuary, a quiet escape from the demands of village life. But the weight of their differences hung over them, an unspoken truth neither could ignore. Aelfric had noticed subtle changes in Lyrielle recently, shifts in her mood, in the way her eyes seemed to darken for brief moments, as though she were battling some unseen burden. He didn't know how to address it, but it was impossible to ignore. Every time he gazed at her, he saw the weariness in her, the quiet sorrow that seemed to permeate her very being. One crisp evening, when the air was filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, Aelfric sought her out once more. He had sensed she was retreating into herself, becoming more distant with each encounter, and it troubled him. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her even to time itself. He found her beneath a massive oak, the very same one where they had shared their first deep conversation. The golden light of sunset spilled through the branches, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Lyrielle was seated on the mossy ground, her wings folded neatly behind her, her gaze distant. She appeared deep in thought, lost in the faraway places her mind often wandered to. "Aelfric," she said quietly as he approached, not startled, but as if she had been waiting for him. Her voice, though soft, held a certain heaviness that made his heart ache. He crouched beside her, his eyes searching her face. "Lyrielle," he said gently, "I've noticed you've been different lately. You're distant. Are you all right?" She sighed, a deep, almost mournful sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "I am fine, Aelfric," she said, her tone tinged with something he couldn't quite place. "But you must understand that I am not like you. My existence is not bound by the same rules." His brows furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? You're not bound by the same rules? You've told me before that you live beyond time, but..." "I live beyond time," she interrupted softly, her gaze turning upward to the canopy above them. "But even the Fae are not immune to the forces that govern the world. Time moves differently for me, but it still moves. And no matter how much I wish it weren't true, the time we have together is finite." Aelfric's chest tightened. "Finite? speak like that? We're here now, Lyrielle. We're here together. Her lips curved into a wistful, sad smile. Yes, we are here now. But I cannot stay forever, Aelfric. My presence in your world, it is not meant to last. The Fae cannot remain in one place for too long, for we are tied to the balance of nature, to the flow of time. We are meant to pass through, not stay. The words hit him like a blow. His heart, which had swelled with hope, now felt heavy with a crushing weight. But we can make it work, can't we? There has to be a way. Lyrielle shook her head slowly, her wings fluttering with a soft sigh, as though they too felt the sadness in her words. You do not understand, Aelfric. I am not of this world, and you are not of mine. Your life is fleeting, and mine stretches far beyond your understanding. We are like stars that briefly cross each other's paths in the vastness of the night sky. Bright, beautiful, but distant, never truly able to touch. Aelfric grasped her hands, his heart thundering in his chest. But I don't care about time. I don't care if it's impossible. I just want to be with you. Her silver eyes softened, but the sorrow in them deepened. You do not understand, she repeated gently, her voice barely above a whisper. I have lived through countless lifetimes, seen empires rise and fall, watched people I have known fade away. I have witnessed the passing of time in ways you cannot begin to imagine. I have loved, I have lost, and I have moved on. But now, Aelfric, now that I have met you, I feel something I have not felt in a very long time. She turned her gaze back to the ground, her wings trembling ever so slightly. I am not sure how much longer I can stay in this world. The pull of my true home grows stronger each day. The winds call me, the stars beckon me, and I cannot resist them for much longer. Aelfric's throat tightened. What are you saying? I'm saying that I will have to leave, Lyrielle said, her voice steady but filled with an unspoken pain. And when I do, you will be left behind. You will carry on, and I will be a memory. A fleeting thought that lingers for only a short time before it fades into nothing. Aelfric stood suddenly, the urge to run, to escape the crushing reality of her words overwhelming him. No, this isn't how it's supposed to be, he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. I can't lose you. Lyrielle stood with him, her wings unfolding in a slow, graceful arc. You will never lose me, Aelfric, not truly, because while our time together is limited, what we have is real, and that is more than most ever get. Her words were soft but firm, and as much as Aelfric wanted to fight them, to deny the truth in them, he knew deep down she was right. She was a being of the Fae, an ancient soul that existed beyond his understanding, and no matter how much he wished it, their worlds could never fully align. I will always remember you, she whispered, her hands gently cupping his face, her touch like the softest breeze. And that is enough. That is more than enough. Aelfric closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, the warmth of her hands against his skin, grounding him in the moment, as if time itself had ceased to matter. He couldn't stop the tears that welled in his eyes, the heartbreak that surged within him, but he knew one thing for certain. The love he had for her was not bound by the limits of time. It was a love that transcended everything, life, death, and even the impossible. For a moment, they stood there together in the silent forest, beneath the ancient oak, holding on to each other in the only way they could. And as the moon rose high in the sky, casting its gentle light over the land, they shared a single bittersweet kiss, a kiss that would be there forever, no matter how fleeting their time together was. The air had grown heavier as the days stretched on. Aelfric could feel the change in the wind, the soft whisper of something distant and inevitable pulling at his soul. He could sense it in the way Lyrielle's eyes had grown even more distant, in the way her laughter had become rare, like the last glimmer of light before the dusk. The truth she had spoken weeks ago weighed on him like a stone, sinking deeper with every passing day. The village had begun to notice the change too. The once vibrant, carefree Aelfric now walked with a quiet intensity, his mind constantly drifting to the forest, to Lyrielle. And yet, no matter how much he wanted to stay in the comfort of his home, he knew his heart was no longer there. It belonged to the Fae, to the world beyond the trees. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, Aelfric made his way into the forest one last time. He had known, deep in his heart, that this moment was coming. The time for goodbyes had arrived. Lyrielle would leave soon, her essence drawn back to the world she truly belonged to. As he entered the clearing where they had shared so many moments, his chest tightened. The once welcoming space now felt cold and empty. There was no sign of her, no gentle hum of her magic, no soft rustling of her wings. The forest was still, as though holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. He called out her name softly, his voice barely more than a whisper against the stillness of the trees. Lyrielle. And then, as if she had always been there, she appeared in the shadows, her form emerging from the twilight like a dream made flesh. Her silver wings shimmered faintly in the dying light, and her eyes, those eyes that had held so many emotions, so many lifetimes, met his with a quiet acceptance. Aelfric, she said, her voice soft, but the sorrow in it was undeniable. You've come, he nodded, his throat thick with emotion. I knew it was time. I could feel it. She smiled, but the sadness in her eyes never wavered. Yes, it is time. The winds are calling me. My time here with you is coming to an end. Aelfric stepped forward, his heart hammering in his chest. Please, don't go. Stay with me. We can find a way. I don't care if it's impossible. I don't care about the Fae or the rules. I just want you to stay. Lyrielle's expression softened, and she stepped closer to him, her wings folding behind her. She reached out and touched his cheek with the gentlest of caresses. Aelfric, you don't understand. I have lived for so long, longer than you can imagine. I have seen worlds rise and fall. I have loved and lost, and always I have had to move on. My nature is not like yours. I cannot stay here forever. The weight of her words pressed down on him, and his breath hitched as he tried to find the words to hold on to her. But why does it have to be like this? Why can't we have just a little more time? Just one more moment? Lyrielle closed her eyes for a brief moment, as though collecting her thoughts. Because that is the way of things. The Fae cannot be bound by time, and you are bound by it. You are mortal, Aelfric. Your time is limited, and mine stretches far beyond anything you can imagine. Our worlds are too different. You deserve a life that is yours, one that you can live fully, not one that is constantly shadowed by the impossible. Aelfric's heart clenched painfully, the finality of her words settling into his bones. I don't care about time, he repeated, his voice breaking. I just care about you. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she remained strong as always. And I care about you, Aelfric, more than you know. But love cannot change the nature of things. I have to go. Aelfric felt as though the ground beneath him were crumbling away, leaving nothing but emptiness. The thought of losing her, of watching her slip away into the world she belonged to, was unbearable. And yet, he could see the truth in her eyes, in the way she held herself, in the way her presence seemed to shimmer with the fading light. He stepped forward, his hands trembling as they grasped her shoulders, pulling her gently toward him. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply stood there in the fading twilight, their bodies pressed together, the air around them thick with everything they could never say. And then, as if time itself had stopped, Aelfric kissed her, fiercely, desperately, pouring every ounce of his heart into that kiss. Lyrielle kissed him back, her hands cradling his face, her wings fluttering softly against his back as though they, too, felt the weight of this final goodbye. The kiss was everything, an eternity crammed into a single moment. The warmth of their bodies, the softness of her lips, the faint taste of salt and sorrow. It was all they had left. And in that kiss, Aelfric poured every ounce of love he had, every bit of his longing, every whispered promise that he would remember her, even when she was gone. When they finally pulled away, both were breathless, tears staining their cheeks. Aelfric rested his forehead against hers, his hands still gripping her arms. "Please don't go," he whispered again, his voice hoarse with emotion. Lyrielle's expression softened one last time, and she placed her hand over his heart. "I must, Aelfric, but you will never be without me. Not truly. I will live in your heart, in your memories. I will be a part of you, always." Aelfric nodded, even though it felt as if his soul were being torn in two. He couldn't find the words to express the depth of his sorrow, of his love. But he knew, deep down, that this was their final moment. There would be no more chances, no more time. Lyrielle stepped back slowly, her wings unfurling in a soft, graceful motion, catching the last light of the fading sun. "Goodbye, Aelfric," she said, her voice a mere whisper on the wind. Aelfric watched, his heart breaking as she turned and began to walk away, her figure dissolving into the mist that began to rise from the forest floor. The last he saw of her was the faint glow of her wings, disappearing into the trees. And then she was gone. The silence of the forest was deafening. Aelfric stood there, frozen, unable to move, as the world around him seemed to still. The stars began to twinkle in the sky above, their cold, distant light mocking the warmth of the love he had just lost. And in that stillness, Aelfric understood. He could never forget her. He would carry her memory with him for the rest of his days, a love that would endure even as time slipped by, a love that was as timeless as the stars themselves. In this chapter, Aelfric and Lyrielle are forced to face the inevitable end of their time together, culminating in an emotional and heartbreaking farewell. Their love transcends time, but it cannot change the reality of their different worlds. The chapter closes with Aelfric's promise to carry her memory, showing the depth of their bond, even as they part.